This video is sponsored by Shortform.
If you want to do what everyone else is doing, then you're going to get average results. Otherwise, everyone will get the top marks, but that's not true. So stuff like past papers, Anki, the mainstream techniques are mainstream because everyone does them. But not everyone can be like the top students. Therefore, the top students must be doing something different, or they're doing conventional techniques, but they have something different.
Tell us about what was the kind of process that you went through to get the grades that you got while you were going through high school?
Basically, when I was in early high school, so junior, I didn't really have many processes. I knew that I was good at studying. I knew that I could get the marks, but at that point in my education, it was quite easy. So it didn't really require me to have a process.
Derrick is currently studying medicine at Monash University. Last year, they got a 99.95 ATAR, which is the highest score in Australia. Only about the top 0.05% of students achieve this. They got a perfect score for their IB, exceeding the grade boundary by 15 to 20% for all of their subjects, which is equivalent to a perfect 4.0 GPA in the States.
As I moved into the more senior years of high school, I realized that the competition was greater and the demands were greater as well. So that meant that I needed to kind of step up my game. That's when I kind of got into looking at different studying techniques. And initially I got sucked into kind of the Anki bandwagon where I spammed Anki for like hours every day. And that seemed to help kind of, but then I realized it was super unsustainable and it wasn't actually getting me like the top marks because I wasn't getting like those curveball questions that require you to have really in-depth knowledge, because Anki is basically just like rote learning. So then I was like not satisfied. So instead of, I guess, like other people, what they did was they increased their effort. They just worked harder or they got tutoring. I did neither of those things. Instead, I was just trying to find like a way that I could be self-sustaining and improve my own study system. And that's when I experimented with like mind mapping and stuff, but also I experimented with like a lot of other things, like the way that I was setting on my schedule, like what I was prioritizing in a study session. Should I be prioritizing like the tips and tricks to like try and get the top marks, or is it more my conceptual understanding?
Is this kind of around the time where I would have met you when you joined the course and stuff, or is this like before? Are we talking about before that?
This is like about the time that I joined the course. Basically, when I joined the course and I got experience with these different techniques, it allowed me to really focus on what exactly I needed to do in order to get the top marks without sacrificing other parts of my life. Because in year 12, I had a bunch of other stuff that I wanted to do apart from studying. So I didn't want to just study all day and have no life and still get top marks. I want to have a balance. So that's why I really put a lot of effort into trying to do the bare minimum to get the top marks instead of trying to focus on the outcome. I got to get a A+ for everything. It was more okay, cool, I got an A+, but how could I have improved my process to get that particular mark for, the next assessment? And that's basically my mindset for all of high school, which I think was not something that a lot of people did.
No, I don't think that's common.
Yeah. And especially the tutoring thing, would practice speaking Chinese to improve my language skills. And that was in the context of me trying to interleave my practice and try different conversation and stuff and improve my vocab. Other than that, a lot of the stuff that I did was just purely based on my own observations and experiments, rather than people telling me to do something or trying to teach me something. And I just found that pointless when I could teach myself. And I know a lot of people got tutoring and they didn't do super well. Some people did do well in high school, but then you notice once you get into university, especially med school, people fall off. They may have done super well in high school, getting lots of tutoring, 6-7 hours of tutoring a week in for every single subject. That doesn't exist in uni. So you notice that a lot of people become a lot less academically successful. They become a lot less able to just study themselves and deal with the content by themselves.
I mean, I think a lot of people will say that, it's only possible for you to not get tutoring because you're capable of teaching yourself. Someone would say well, I can't teach myself. What would you say to that?
Yeah. So I get that a lot. My brain doesn't work that way. It's just because you're really smart, that's why you're, able to do all these things. You're just really lucky. And to that, I say that was not the case for a long time. It's not I was able to independently study to the extent that I did now. Sure, I admit that during high school, I definitely did have natural ability and I was definitely able to succeed academically, more like, I guess, in the formative years of high school, without much intervention. But I think that the main thing is that if you are more aware of the techniques you're using and you use that to enhance your own natural abilities, whether that's, naturally really good or not, you will definitely see benefit. And the benefit will be much more than just simply tanking on like, natural ability. Am I just kind of doing stuff randomly and just hoping for the best?
Yeah.
In which case, you can't really blame like natural ability. You can't say, oh, it's just my fault that I was like not born like a genius. Well, I mean, people are born with all sorts of like natural variation ability, but the important thing is what you do with that, right? Like you use that ability in order to achieve things. You don't just rest on your laurels and then be like, oh, well, if only I was, 200 IQ points higher, then I would be able, I'd be able to do this.
Yeah. I think the thing is that like people really underestimate themselves. And the potential, like when I first started working with students, I didn't really know how far you could train someone to be good at studying. I figured that if you were kind of like achieving a 70%, like you can train yourself to get to like an 80. If you were like if you're failing, you can train yourself to get to a point where you're like passing or doing like kind of around the average level. Now I just realized the extent that you can train yourself in like a formal education setting. I don't know about like actual IQ point increase or whatever, because I mean, IQ points in themselves are a little bit kind of like, it's like controversial really about how significant it really is. But the amount that you can actually improve, especially for high school, how much you can really improve just by training yourself is like you can easily go from getting like 60% to 90s from just training. I mean, there's actually someone in the course that we all know very well who joined the course going in the 60s and is achieving in like the high 90s. In fact, I don't actually know if you know this, but
there's multiple.
but there's, well, I mean, this guy, who I won't say their name, but they got interviewed by their teacher during like they got caught up in like a parent-teacher interview or something, and then they basically like accused him of cheating.
Yeah.
Because he improved too much, and then he was just like, nah, like I'm just doing it like this now because like, and he like explained it, and the teacher just like didn't believe it. They were just like, nah, that's like funny. Like it's like the ultimate compliment when like you improve so much that not only do you get accused of cheating, but even after explaining why you're not cheating, no one even believes you because it doesn't seem realistic. So I just thought that was, it was pretty funny. So anyone watching, this recording, I would say like, just don't be too disheartened. Like a lot of these self-limiting beliefs that we form about ourselves in terms of like what we're doing something in a certain way, and that way is flawed, then our experience is not going to be a true reflection of our potential. It's just a reflection of the way that we've tried to do things. I've worked with so many students that are excellent now that they just thought like, I'm just an idiot, basically. Like academic achievement will never be for me. Like they only gaze longingly across the room to like, the genius in their class, thinking I'll never be like that. And now people are gazing longingly at them. So yeah, a message of hope, I guess.
Yeah, I actually have a whole video on this, and then I kind of like dissected and pull out all my notes and kind of saw the progression of them. So kind of my story is that in primary school, I was doing okay. I did have my fair shares of B's with some A's. Definitely wasn't the top student, and I definitely had some C's as well.
Archer's list of academic achievements is very long. He's currently a medical student at Flinders University, and he has been receiving results that are equivalent to a final year medical student, only in his third year of uni. When he was in high school, he basically did double or triple what normal students do, and he got first place and top scores in every single assessment in every single subject. So he did 9 high school subjects instead of the 5 that you need to graduate, and simultaneously 2 university papers where he got high distinction for both papers and A+ for all of his subjects. Naturally, he got a 99.95 ATAR, which is the highest possible mark in the nation. And he was also state ranked, which means that he got the highest mark in the state for 4 of his subjects. He got one of 26 South Australian Commendation Awards. He's currently going through medical school with a perfect GPA, and throughout all of this, he's been founding and managing businesses and working full-time hours on top of all of his studying. So Archer basically got the highest possible grade for everything while doing 2 to 3 times more than everyone else.
which mum wasn't really proud of. But basically, my mum gave me a bet. She said, if you get A's in high school, then I'll pay you. Till this day, I still haven't been paid for that. So that was a big scam. But essentially, that kind of made me put the effort in and kind of put my head down. And in year 8 and 9, my grades did definitely see a big spike, essentially just from effort. And that's obviously the main thing that a lot of students do anyway. And that was also the thing for me. Then kind of in year 9, my grades started to dip a little bit more despite the effort, especially in English. And that was really unsettling for me. Now, for the kind of personality that I think I have, I really don't like being limited by things. So I really, really will push and try anything that I can to really unleash my potential in a way. And so similarly, like I even remember in year 9, I kind of retaught myself all the grammatical structures and how to think about English. Because it was my first language, I never really learned it. So I kind of just always like thought about and guessed where to put commas and things. And so I think that kind of carried out going into year 10, where I put even more effort in again, and it did pay off. But eventually when I moved on to year 11 and year 12, where I started to really knuckle down on just like very, I guess, like hardcore incremental improvement. Like every single day I would be thinking about how have I, improved today, and what can I focus on for tomorrow.
The trend that I'm getting here between, both yourself and Derrick is that you're very there's a very, very strong emphasis on observing the process and being like really, really process driven, right? And that is rare, because if I think back to like when, it's kind of funny really, because I'm kind of like a learning coach now, and it's what I do for a literal living. But if I think back to like when I was going through high school, I was such a crappy student, man. Like I played a lot of games. I don't know if I even like thought about things. Like, did I even have thoughts? I just feel like I was like some mindless amoeba just like floating around. I distinctly remember like literally lying in bed one night. And it was the first time that I ever had the self-realization that like personal improvement could actually be kind of like a worthwhile thing to venture into. And that was actually when I was thinking about what new game I should play. At the time, I was like really ripping through like heaps of Korean, like these free to play like MMO games. They were like coming out left, right, and center. And it's essentially like exactly the same game, but I would only play up until the point where it starts getting like slow to level up. And I like quit, and then I play like a new game. And I was thinking about that one day because I was getting through so many games. I was running out of games to play. And I was thinking like, why am I doing this? Like, why do I never like get to the end game? And I just get bored. And it was because I only really enjoyed the process of like leveling up. Like I like that feeling of like progression and just like that kind of that dopamine hit, I guess, of progression. And speaking of leveling up, one way that I've been doing that in my own life is using Shortform, who's a sponsor of this video. If you don't already know, Shortform creates these book summaries and book guides. They're a great supplement for books that you may already be reading or listening to on something like Audible. I've recently been listening to The Courage to be Disliked on Audible, and I've also been traveling around Australia, so it's been really helpful for me to be able to get some of those key ideas and be walking around the city and not need to write down notes or jot down anything as I'm walking along. One of the things that Shortform does that nowhere else does, at least to this level, is that they consolidate the ideas from the book against other similar books and publications. So you're able to get not just the author's perspective, but you can actually use it as a springboard for further reading and learning. This particular book talks about this thing called Adler's psychology or teleology, and it's not something that I was super familiar with, so it was great for me to see what other books are saying and then go ahead and read those or listen to those as well. They have heaps of different genres, and they're releasing new books every single week, and they're all so far of really good quality. You got an audio version as well, so you can listen to them while you're walking around if you want. If you're interested, you can use my link shortform.com/Justin Sung. You can find it in the description, and you get 5 days unlimited access and 20% off your annual subscription. And I was like, man, if only like I could have progression in my own life or like level myself up, and like, man, imagine if I could have like stat points and then I just like put them into like intelligence. Like, oh man, my life would be so good. And then I was like, wait, I can actually do that. That was like a light bulb moment for me, which now that I think about it, I don't know if that means that I was like just a really like dumb kid. Like, I just feel like that's a really like low hanging dim light bulb to have gone off, given that I think I was like 16 or something when I first had that thought. And at that point I was like, okay, I'm gonna start like doing push-ups and stuff. Like I'm gonna increase my like strength stats. That was like the first time I ever thought about like looking at personal development. But I don't think I was ever as process driven as you and Derrick until I was probably in like my second year of uni, where I realized like my high school ways of doing things were just completely not working. And like that was probably the first time I really had that like super intensive process focus on doing things. So speaking of uni, tell me about how things changed for you guys when you went into uni.
So I just recently entered uni. So I guess the most obvious thing is that the mode of like learning and like delivery like of teaching is much different. So like obviously you have lectures in uni, you attend tutorials, workshops. It's a lot more independent. And I think that the main thing is that in high school, there's lots of scaffolding. So like there's always someone like kind of like holding your hand or like pushing you to do stuff. You know, like if you don't hand in your homework and stuff, like the teacher will like follow up. So I feel like there's like a lot more accountability in high school, whereas in a uni, like if you don't show up to like lectures and stuff, no one cares. So essentially it's up to you to actually put the work in. And that's when, if you've spent like your entire high school career relying on tutoring, it can be an issue because you've become so accustomed to like just not really being your own person and you don't know what to do. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the content gets harder. University level, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm doing medicine, but like the content is a lot more. There's more breadth, there's more depth. It's just like harder, like academically in every way. So I just feel like it's just, yeah, like, you know, you think that you've got it under control, but then you get into uni and it's like a new challenge.
I think a lot of people don't realize that high school is a great time to start the reflective process because you don't want to have to handle the high volume, high pace, high intensity and develop all these new systems and processes and habits at the same time as trying to deal with that. Like you want to have some habits and processes of like reflection and improvement, and you want to have worked out quite a few things before you enter into uni, because you're going to have to then work out other things when you're in uni regardless. You don't want to have to work out like everything from scratch while you're there. You know, like the analogy I always give, like you guys have probably heard this, like, I don't know, like hundreds of times by now, but like, you know, don't learn to swim while you're drowning. It's interesting because like the whole med school thing, right, is that people don't connect the dots that if in order to even enter into a program, you need to have results that are like in the top 1%, then that means that literally everyone in that program receives those types of grades. So the curriculum that is designed for people that are only like that is obviously naturally going to be more challenging than what you would expect for the, 99% of people that, if your pinnacle of academic achievement is literally where another degree's entry point starts.
The even more funny thing is like on that point, because I thought about it a lot, some of our actual assessments require that the, like bottom 30th percentile or 40th percentile all fail. So literally all these people who became top of schools and stuff, most of them are going to experience like failure for the first time in their life because literally 30% or 40% of us have to fail.
Yeah. The way that I say it is like, I talk to these students that are in high school and they're like, oh yeah, like I'll be all good for uni because I'm like doing kind of well. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, so if you were to take like, do you think you're in like the top 10 students in your year group? And then they'll be like, maybe, or like, maybe not. And I was like, okay, well, what if you take like the top 3 from like every single school in your entire area? Do you think that you'd be in like the top 10 of like a class of only the top 3 students of every school in your area? And they'd be like, oh, probably not. And it's like, well, that's basically what you need to be to be all good when you're actually like in the degree. So, but they don't believe it.
I didn't believe it.
Yeah.
I thought Ivy was the peak.
Others who were maybe at the top of their schools, when they're suddenly put in this position where Archer mentioned, like suddenly they're in the bottom 30 or bottom 40, how do you think this affects them?
It's a huge hit to the ego. And I'm not saying that getting the top marks is necessarily healthy or it's like the best mindset to have. Obviously, getting those top marks is just like, at least for me, I'm not really obsessed or fussed about getting the top marks. I just want to do my best. And if my best is, getting high marks, then that is my best. But yeah, for these students, I think a lot of the time it's like, is it really about doing my best? Or is it now just get enough to like get through?
A lot of my classmates, didn't really adapt to that very well because it created a lot of anxiety, a lot of imposter syndrome was pretty common, especially in the clinical years. People get hit with that quite a lot. Like even me, when I was going through my preclinical years, I was like, oh, I'm like pretty all good. And then when I went through clinical years, I was just like, man, I suck. Like I seriously suck. And that was when I realized like, I was still not very good at studying at that stage compared to the systems I've got now. It was very like loose and just random. And then I realized like the method of studying that I was using was so not optimized for like how I actually needed to learn it. Which is why I'm so like pedantic about when I'm, talking to medical students. Like I'm always saying like you need to learn it in a way that is like going to be clinically relevant for you, and exams are getting better and that they're becoming more and more aligned to that than it used to be like 10, 15 years ago. There's still this gap, between like preclinical assessments and what you need and like real clinical knowledge. And I always say for like medical students or even like any student that is learning where you have to use the knowledge somehow, somewhere, which you would hope at a university, like that's most students for most things, because otherwise like why are you even there? Think about how you're going to have to actually use that knowledge and study in a way that gets towards that goal, not necessarily like hit a certain exam. But yeah, Archer, what about you when you entered into uni? Because I know that kind of a lot of your methods and systems changed between like high school and uni.
I think this is going to be a very hard question for me to answer because I did university classes, like I guess an engineering flavor, while I was in year 12. And so I was very well acquainted with that kind of environment while being in year 12. And so then essentially everything that Derrick's talking about is kind of what ended up happening for me when I started university and medicine. I was like, oh yeah, I'm in, right? It's cool. I'll just do the minimum and get the high distinction and move on. So,
but your minimum is the high distinction. You like,
like most people, the minimum is the pass. Like they lower their standards as they get in.
Yeah.
I remember talking to one of my classmates and he got like a borderline pass. And if you get a borderline pass, you actually get tagged by the faculty to like keep an eye on you. And he was like, I'm so happy whenever I get a borderline pass. And I was like, why are you happy about getting a borderline pass? Because like I was still at that time like of the mentality of like that typical high achieving mentality. And he was like, it just tells me that I did the bare minimum that I needed to do, but like to still get by. And when I heard that, I was like, I can admire that. Like I can admire someone who's like so laid back and like whose life is about so much more than obviously just like studying. And to be honest, well, they're a doctor now and I think they're quite fantastic as a doctor. They're still extremely chill. They have like a calming effect on everyone that's like near them, that works with them, which is probably more valuable than like most doctors' clinical knowledge anyway, just to be able to calm people down around you. But yeah, I always thought that was an interesting kind of like different perspective. But Archer, like for you, it wouldn't be about necessarily like the independence thing, right? But it's about how you're able to get what you consider as the minimum, like get your HDs, while also like pretty much just not really even going to med school almost.
Yeah, my attendance is like not great.
Yeah, so like what do you do at the moment, like as you're going through medical school? Like what's your schedule, like what's your hours filled with?
Just work. I don't go to practicals, I don't go to lectures, I don't go to workshops. I'll rock up we have like a weekly test, so that does take up my time. And I might study for that maybe on the Sunday beforehand, just like pre-studying and all that. And then maybe, just a little bit more interleaving before the test happens on the Friday. But I was having a conversation with Derrick about this and like the hours that, like I was kind of explaining to, some students as well, like the amount of content we're going through now has like doubled, tripled, like almost every year. But my study time is going down, which is the like complete opposite. So I think that at the moment, on average, I'm averaging around 5 to 7 hours a week outside of the clinical classes that I actually have to be at.
In terms of studying, right?
Yeah.
And Derrick, I think you were saying similar, like you're studying around sort of 6-7 hours a week.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Sometimes like less, like sometimes like 5 hours. And then
So the question that people are going to have on their mind is like, how is that possible? How is it possible that you're able to, because obviously when we're talking about this, we can conceive of how it is not only possible, but like quite logical actually, but you weren't able to, I don't know, like just materialize knowledge into your brain, like magically. Like there's obviously that process and there's obviously a journey that kind of it took. What are the things that you think you do uniquely that other people do not do that allows you to have this kind of experience of going through not only university, but actually going through medical school, which is, I mean, I would say most people would agree medical school tends to be the most academically challenging degree of all the mainstream kind of degree pathways. In most countries in the world, that's the case.
I think the primary thing for me, but I have a pretty strong curiosity. And so I basically need to know the first principles and fundamentals of pretty much everything that I'm learning to kind of be satisfied with it. I think another mindset thing I had with me through high school was that I wasn't ever satisfied with just accepting the answer that a teacher gave. I'd always try to find fault in it. And then often I would, and then that would bring up a discussion. And so going into university, that's something that I do still, such that a lot of the stuff, like the smaller details that I may have to remember for, I don't know, an exam coming up, it just becomes obvious. So there's no need for flashcards or no need for more practice questions or anything, because those foundations are there with a logical framework to kind of step through, a question that may get presented to me.
So as a learning coach, I'm going to step in and say that like a lot of people will listen to that and just feel like that's just magic. In their eyes, in their ears, all they heard was step one, be overpowered and just learn. But it's, what you're really talking about here is because there is an innate curiosity and innate drive, but you have to be able to wrap that around a method, a system in which you're able to activate and utilize that curiosity and pull through concepts. And some people like what, Derrick was saying, how your inherent natural ability, is going to affect you to a certain point, but it's sort of about what you're doing with it. Like if people don't have that innate curiosity, for example, like what about a subject that you don't really tend to enjoy studying as much? Like what do you do there where you don't just naturally feel that curiosity?
I kind of force it. So the clear example I always think about is like, I'm always really annoyed when we have to learn about plants in biology. And even when we kind of had to do it a little bit in med school as well. So I'd find any way to relate it to, I don't know, maybe the aspects of biology that I enjoy more, how it can relate to disease or how it makes it relevant to, I guess, our medical content. And then I'd also relate it to physics because, I did some engineering stuff before as well, and I'm really interested in that. So I find that so I can kind of have that as my bridgeway, my gateway, to kind of learn those fundamentals more easily and then go from there.
So this is a cognitive skill, right? And people can learn this skill. Like if you're not interested in something, you can develop the skill of being able to create relevance, force curiosity to an extent, and then you can develop the skills to then work your way down to the first principles. Because that's another big thing, is that people struggle to find the first principle in the first place because it's often not directly or explicitly taught. And so that's one of those big barriers, is that people with very high natural deep processing abilities are often able to find those first principles much more clearly. Their line of inquiry is much clearer and more like straightforward, and they can kind of get to that first principle and work their way up more naturally. Whereas people that aren't naturally able to do that, it feels like a magic trick, because it just, that black box is like, you don't know how that's actually happening. But again, that's actually like a process that can be trained. Like you can train yourself to be able to have a certain line of inquiry that allows you to find these first principles very quickly. And then you can train yourself to be able to take that and then develop stuff on it, kind of like what you're talking about. And actually, because you've kind of always had, good deep processing compared to like before, kind of we worked together a lot more extensively and we went through like the systems and the methods and the techniques to kind of like weaponize it a little bit more. What's the difference like for you in terms of subjectively, like how you feel with like the process of studying or learning, and also like kind of the impact that it has for you in terms of being able to not only have the natural ability, but like having been able to just like really systemize and optimize it?
I think the easiest way to summarize it is just like less noise. Kind of all the stuff that I see, I can more acutely and more easily recognize what are the things that are most important, focus there, and then I can kind of carry on through that process.
So what's the impact that actually has?
Well, it just makes study a lot easier, and I don't have to put anywhere near as much time into it. And then I get to focus on all the other things that I want to be doing with my time.
Yeah, because the insecurity that I think a lot of people have is like, well, if I focus on those principles, like won't I forget all those details? But you sort of mentioned it before, is that when you actually do have this method of thinking, the details do to a large extent become fairly obvious. If you start from thinking all the stuff I need to memorize through repetition and through my flashcards, and that's your baseline, that's where you're starting from, then it might feel impossible to not need to do that. But actually, if you don't start from that baseline and you just start from looking at it in terms of like more principles and really developing a strong schema, and if you're able to do that quickly, then the amount that you actually truly would need to rote memorize can reduce to like a fifth or like a tenth of that original list. And that's a huge time save for most people that are, really flashcard heavy. It's like going from 1,000 flashcards to get through to like 100. I mean, it's a massive difference.
Yeah. So like even when I was taking year 12 biology, I think I had like 1,000, 2,000 flashcards. And now like in a semester of medicine, I may only have 50.
The actual level of detail and the depth at which you will know information is actually more fluent and more accessible than it would have been just purely and it's just the way that the brain kind of works. But we just don't believe it because I guess not many people talk about it, which is I guess why we're talking about it.
Yeah.
On that note of deep processing, Justin has a really good article talking about it. And I think when I first read the article myself, I think it's on JTT, it's about deep processing. You had an analogy about comparing yellow bricks and red bricks. When you had that comparison between someone who has low levels of deep processing, where they just take it at face value, like, yeah, this is a yellow brick, this is a red brick, and versus someone who has deep processing, who's really curious about it, who's asking question after question about how they can compare what's this yellow brick for? What's this red brick for? Which one is better? And I actually found it quite interesting because never in my mind did I think that there were people who just accepted things just as they were. And I think it's interesting because these sort of things, like what a person's really thinking of when they are trying to study, it's not something that you can actually observe from the outside, and hence why it seems like it's magic.
And Derrick, we were talking earlier today, right, about how you know that there are some people that like do really, really well, but they have their study techniques are like terrible, and they maybe like only use flashcards. And you know what I said was that yes, if you have a very high level of deep processing, you can actually get away with not really being very good at studying at all, like in terms of your actual technique, which is why sometimes it's really hard to learn how to study properly because the top students aren't necessarily aware of what it is that they're doing that actually makes them a top student to begin with, because it may actually be just a subconscious natural process that they're engaging in. Like who you really want to talk to are, you know, people that figured out how to become the top student, like when they weren't initially to begin with. And students that do have really high deep processing, if they actually developed a higher level of skill, they probably would be able to be even greater. Like I think Archer, you're probably a good example, right? Because like if I never really went through like all the techniques and like the proper encoding principles and all that sort of stuff, you'd probably still be a pretty good student. Like you'd probably still be relatively well achieving, but I am not sure if you would also be like working full time at the same
Doing
time.
more than full time. Like I just like consistently work and then I realize, oh, I gotta study. Maybe you should do that.
Yeah. I mean, for those of you that don't know, like Archer and I actually like literally work together, like literally employed at I Can Study. So like I talk to Archer more than many other like human beings in the world.
Yeah.
And like when I was going through uni as well, like I was working like 30, 40 hours a week. And at the time, like my study efficiency, when I was actually working 30, 40 hours a week, when I was in like second, third year of uni, my study efficiency was a lot better than when I was in my first year of uni or in high school, but it was nowhere near the kind of potential of where it could have been. And at that time, like it was a struggle because I was working like 100+ hours a week to try to fit kind of everything in. And then when you hit clinical years, or when you just get busier, or you just run out of energy, it's like everything just starts falling off, and then you just start sacrificing everything, and it just feels even worse because you're coming from like a baseline of doing extracurriculars and like loving life and whatever, and then now you're just like a sad slug in the library, just like all I can do now is study. And then so when I talk to a lot of my colleagues, you know, previous classmates, you know, a lot of them are quite like, they lament a lot about like the hobbies that have died and that they've kind of lost, and how they don't really have any time to do anything in their lives other than just like work, go home, sleep, like regret their life choices, and then just go back to work.
I was going to actually say, like, on that note, when you talked about, you know, people, the top students succeeding without actually much technique, I find that that's like really true, especially when, you know, in terms of shaping people's mindset about like what it takes to get like the top marks. Typically, that's lots of past papers in high school. So you'll get, I guess, people who are like, oh, like are really proud of the fact that they completed 140 biology practice papers. Or like, oh, did you hear that person that did 200 methods papers, like 200 maths papers in order to prepare for their exam? Wow, they're so hardworking. And like, you know, this is something that I could never be like that hardworking and like that dedicated. So it's something that's commended quite a lot. Whereas I think that what doesn't get as much credit is the people who, hey, I did one practice paper and I still got the same mark or higher. And that's just because I spent a lot of time investing in myself, kind of leveling myself up rather than just grinding away, spending lots of time and potentially sacrificing other parts of your life just so that you can get this high mark, which honestly, most people don't do. It's only these people with really deep processing that can pull it off. 99% of people who do this, like, you know, grinding of the past papers do not get the top marks because you physically can't. And it's almost like I think of it like this, if you want to do what everyone else is doing, then you're going to get average results. Otherwise, everyone will get the top marks, but that's not true. So stuff like past papers, Anki, the mainstream techniques are mainstream because everyone does them, but not everyone can be like the top students. Therefore, the top students must be doing something different, or they're doing conventional techniques, but they have something different in that they have naturally high deeper processing, which you might not have.
I just wanted to comment on how, Derrick, you're really true to like internalize the messages that I've been teaching you over the last year or two or whatever.
Yeah.
It's you really made it your own, which is great.
I think that not many people are really critically thinking about this kind of information that's presented to them. And I think like a lot of the metrics that people use to measure what a good student or what good studying is really not very meaningful.
It comes back to what we were saying before about like, if you don't know what it is about studying that actually produces the result, you just cling on to anything. And it's like, it's such an easy flex to be like, oh, I studied more hours than you. I did more papers than you. Like, oh, I did more questions than you. It's like, well, let me go print out your certificate for you. But like at the end of the day, we're still going to get the same grade or the same result. And this is why like literally everyone complains about, okay, not literally everyone, figuratively, everyone complains about how my videos are like too long and I go over too much theory. But it's like, I go over the theory because I want people to be less just totally ignorant and clueless about this stuff and stop like just holding on to these random arbitrary metrics. Like, like the thing that I always talk about, right? When people say like, well, how many hours should you study? In fact, I'm sure Archer like will still get questions about this. Like if you're, I think, a study YouTuber, everyone will DM you and ask you like, how many hours do you study? How many hours should I study? And, it's just, from our point of view, it's just like the dumbest question. Well, I've now just remembered that you had the dumbest question asked to you.
I remember.
What do I eat for breakfast?
Yeah. What do you eat for breakfast? Because you just have to think like, is that the thing that is going to make the difference? Which in the case of breakfast, it's just like the answer is obviously no. But if there was a magic number, and if you hit that magic number of hours of studying, like, you've got it. Like if you are able to study this number of hours, you're going to succeed. Like if it was that easy, how easy would it be to be a successful student? Like it's so obvious that that's not the case. So for anyone that asks, how many hours should I study? The question is exactly the same as, how far do I have to drive to go home? It's like completely impossible to answer if you don't know how far away it is, the road you're taking, the traffic conditions, I don't know, the vehicle you're using. Like it's not about the hours, it's about like what you're doing in that time. It's just that most people have no idea about what they're doing in that time because they lack the understanding about like the learning and the cognitive aspect around it and the metacognition. And so they have no way of answering that question. And because they can't answer it, they just don't ask the question in the first place. When in fact, it should be, ask the question and then go and learn and explore and start being able to answer that question.
I really like that analogy of how far do you need to travel to get from one place to another? Because thinking about it from uni to my home, if I drove, best case scenario, Google Maps suggests that it takes me 35 minutes. But it doesn't account for the fact that I might get lost or I might need to pay tolls. Or if I decide to take public transport, that journey can actually extend up to 1.5 hours.
I teach this concept in like webinars and things pretty frequently. And one of the things I talk about is like, don't measure distance, measure displacement, And if you think about it that way, like I think people kind of understand it. But when it comes to learning, the problem is not that people don't understand that concept. Like people do understand that concept. The issue is that they don't know how to think about the actual what's going on. Like they don't know how to open up that black box. They don't know what is going on inside there. And so there's no quick answer for that. Like I'm sure that at the bottom of this video, like someone's going to be like, so what is the best way to learn? Like, how do you study? And it's just like, it's just not that simple. Like this is something that takes, it took me several years to figure out. Like it took, Derrick and Archer, like, years to figure out, lots of trial and error, like that obsession over the process. And that's kind of the first step. So it's not about how do you do it. I guess it is about like, how do you do it? But it's not about how do you study. It's about how do you go about getting better at studying. And the first step there is to like really start obsessing over that process and slowly increasing the rate of improvement. Or if you don't have time and you want to improve more quickly, well, then you got to join the course. And that's a good time to end the video.